Hello and welcome back to Will's World Reviews and More. This video is going to be continuing on in the series of me reviewing the Monday Night War episodes. Today we have episode 10, 11, 12 and 13. So similarly, I say it every time, I'm not going to give away too much. I want you guys to go watch them yourselves. Based on this review or not, it's entirely up to you. I'll give you kind of a quick overview and my thoughts, and then it is up to you if you guys want to watch it or not. I'm just here to kind of give my opinion. So let's get straight into it. Number 10, episode 10, was on the man they call Goldberg. Now, this one was a real eye-opener for me in some ways, because as someone who never watched or really watched WCW, the only WCW I ever saw was my first ever experience of pro wrestling was WCW on Channel 5, I believe. Sometime around 1999, 2000, I remember seeing Sting, and that's about it. So I never really saw Goldberg in WCW. I only ever saw him when he came into the WWE, and it was all a big hype. And at the time, I really wasn't that well schooled on what made a good wrestler and what doesn't make a good wrestler, or my opinions were yet to form. And I did quite like Goldberg because I've never really been a massive fan of The Rock, which we'll get into in a sec. But I liked that rivalry that happened. It was a big buzz for him to come. And his run in WWE wasn't exactly didn't end well. And I really, by that time I'd kind of fallen out of love with wrestling in general. So I really didn't have too many strong opinions on him. In the last 6 months, however, since I became back into wrestling, however, I did have a bit of a soft spot for him just because I liked his intensity and the theatrics. But then after watching this documentary, it became clear that is pretty much what Goldberg's about and nothing else. At the end of the day, he's not a great wrestler. You cannot put him in that category of the Shawn Michaels or the Bret Harts. The kind of guys, or the Austins even, that I really admire and appreciate. That's not to say he wasn't a good wrestler in other ways. He just wasn't a good wrestler technically. That match with William Regal he had was just awful stuff. But it's interesting in a way that you've got to admire him for focusing on his strengths. He was a powerhouse. He could spear, he could jackhammer, and they build up the entrance with him walking through the back with the security guards. That is, sometimes it is really interesting to watch, but that is about it really. But this episode, I think, as well, focuses more on the divide in WCW and how they really are their own worst enemy. In the end, Kevin Nash and Hogan, whoever it was that was supposedly pulling the strings with Bischoff, led to Goldberg perhaps not getting as much shining light as he wanted, and that power divide going on there, and in the end it kind of cost them. But there's not much else to say on that episode. Like I said, it was interesting. It was eye-opening for me to see just how poor Goldberg was as a wrestler, because I think at one stage I was a bit under an illusion. But he does what he does well. He was never ever going to be a technical kind of guy. So that moves on to the next episode 11. In a complete contrast, these two I would say had a bit of a thing as well. Chris Jericho. I've always really liked Jericho, not massively so. Like, I don't think, he could be vying technically for a spot in my top 5 as things go on. I might read his books and that might push him up a little bit. But I've always liked him. I just never really liked him, and I'm not quite sure why. I think it may have been because he was heel for most of the time that I was watching it originally. Like, he became Undisputed Champion when he was heel, when I was kind of watching it. So maybe that had a part to play. But this episode was interesting. There wasn't that much focus on his past in Japan and Mexico. They mentioned it. You kind of think he was definitely an innovator for his time. He wanted to shrug off that cruiserweight label. Sorry. You could kind of say that he was the first to leave the sinking ship that was WCW, followed by Big Show and then Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero. It was almost like Jericho was the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Monday Night Wars. That was there was things going off up to that point that led to the end of the war, or the beginning of the war, sorry. In the end, but that kind of sparked it off. Obviously, he had his massive deal with Goldberg, which I don't understand why. I think Goldberg was just being a bit of an asshole, to be honest. You know, why not fight Jericho? It was obviously a match everyone wanted to see, and then they did have the big things, but Goldberg was not great about it. I guess this is the first thing that kind of the next three episodes to me really kind of hit home how WWE are either well not it's difficult to express really. They're making the same mistakes basically that WCW made or that they made themselves before they became the Attitude Era, and it's really irritating. Like, you know, you can't imagine WWE doing what they did with Jericho now, pushing him to the extent, you know, at the end of the day, he was a guy they got from WCW who travelled the world, and they willingly made him the undisputed champion. And not only that, they pushed him to the extent where he beat the two top guys. He beat Austin and he beat The Rock, you know, to become the first undisputed champion. You know, it was the first real push I witnessed, because when I started watching it, Jericho was, you know, the Intercontinental Champion, messing around with China, and then the next thing you know, he's undisputed champion. You know, it's a great testament to the character as well of Jericho. You know, he has that brilliant kind of balance between turning on the charm, you know, but also then being able to repel people with his arrogance and everything. But it really was like, you know, they need to kind of push these kind of guys now, like Jericho, and give them that kind of chance to get over. You know, I mean, can you imagine the equivalent would be like Dean Ambrose now going ahead and beating Cena, and then kind of, I don't know, beating Brock Lesnar in the same night. It's difficult to believe that's going to happen, but it needs to happen. Otherwise, WWE are going to make the same mistakes that they made in the past. You know, they were innovative at the time with Jericho, but it didn't last long. So what I'm going to do now, guys, is I've done 2 episodes. I'm going to stop the video so it's a bit shorter, upload it, and then I'm going to do the next 2 episodes. But thanks for watching. I hope you liked that quick analysis of those episodes 10 and 11. I'll be back with 12 and 13 in a couple of minutes.